In today's video, I'll be interviewing Alexis Quinn. Alexis is autistic and is a successful author and manager for the Restraint Reduction Net-work. Today we talk about all the highs and the lows from representing Great Britain as an international swimmer to escaping the country due to being held in a mental health hospital. We talk about how the system needs to change and we talk about how they can change. We also talk about Alexis' experiences as an autistic parent and what Alexis has learned along the way. Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of the Autism Connections. Now this is the last session that will be online, and the next 3 episodes will all be in person. So guys, welcome to the last online session, and today's guest is Alexis Quinn. Alexis, thank you for coming on and coming on the Autism Connections. Obviously means a lot. We did a speech for Dimensions. That's the first time I had heard your story. So the question I always ask first to everyone that comes on is, what is your connection to autism?
Wow, that's quite a question. I mean, I'd say that I'm autistic, so all of me is autistic. I think it affects every area of my life. From the way I think about things to the way I structure things to the way I process things. So yeah, it is me, I guess. That's probably the easiest way to explain it.
No, so it's the best answer, to be honest. For many years, I didn't really know what the answer was, apart from, it's me. So I think it is the best answer. When you were I suppose it was quite difficult for yourself because you've also got the added element of that horrible myth out there that, it's only boys that get autism and girls can't get autism. So, obviously that's just so ludicrous now hearing that. But what was that like for you, growing up, trying to get a diagnosis and getting the support?
I think when I was growing up, I was always an outsider. I was always very marginalized. I was always very victimized. I was always quite bullied. And I think that was really difficult. I felt very misunderstood. That was really difficult. I struggled with any type of relatedness to other people. But what that did do was mean that I sort of sought solace in things that were important to me, which at the time was swimming, stories like reading, and my schoolwork. So throwing myself into those things, and I was very lucky, that I had a family that enabled me and encouraged me to do that stuff. I achieved success in those areas, and so I think in a sense that sort of helped my self-esteem, although it was sort of very conditional, as in if I got an A I would get that boost of self-esteem. At least that sort of option was there for me. I have a daughter at the moment who's diagnosed autistic, and it's been a very different experience for her, I think, because I had much more understanding, was able to sort of relate tenderly, I think, to the difficulties that she experiences. And I haven't pushed her for that sort of conditional regard to do things to get praise or attention. I've tried for that just always to be there. So it's interesting what you're saying, Max, about the generations, I think, because sort of 30 years ago, that understanding wasn't there. But then, 30 years later, I'm able to give my daughter a very different experience, I think, than what I had.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's dead right. You know, people always ask me about the understanding. Is it going up? And I think, you know, as you say, if you relate it to 30 years ago, absolutely. Um, it's always gradual, and there's always areas where it massively needs to improve. But hey, it's people like yourself, it's people like I've had on the show that sort of make that advancement, you know, every day to make it more understood, to make it more um, known to people. Um, just on obviously, I had the honour of doing a speech with yourself and Jeremy. So just for the viewers, really, what can you tell us a bit about like your story? What happened to you? Because I think it's such an amazing story, and I was left in awe when I was doing a speech with you. So can you just tell us about your story and the challenges that you had to face?
Yeah, thanks, Max. It was an honour to speak with you as well. I mean, I guess, you know, I grew up, as I said, and you know, I had a lot of positive regard, you know, in terms of getting praise for the things that I was interested in, and I know that's not always the case, you know, for some autistic people. So I'll start with that. You know, oftentimes it's, you know, people's interests are kind of excluded or seen as a problem. Mine never were. So I'll start with that. But then I had a baby. I had my daughter, and my brother died, and all of a sudden, you know, all of that structure and positive regard that I experienced just was gone, you know, and I couldn't manage my sort of sensory experiences. My skin felt like it was on fire, and I needed to move like all of the time. It was so uncomfortable, and everything was just really bright and loud. um so, you know, like how you're told, you go to the doctors, you know, you ask for help. So, you know, following that sound advice, I did, and it was possibly the worst mistake I ever made. And I was admitted to hospital for a 72-hour rest. Um, and of course, as soon as those doors closed, you know, I wasn't a school teacher that I wasn't a mother, I wasn't a sister, I wasn't a daughter, I wasn't, you know, any of those things that people had seen me as before, and which I guess gave me that sort of validation. And instead, I was just seen as a risk, you know, that needed to be controlled. Somebody with deficits and disorders and impairments and rigid this and obsessive that. And I think, you know, there's so much debate at the moment going on at a national level about, you know, whether hospitals are good places ever for autistic people. And we know, don't we, that the Mental Health Act Code of Practice says that they're not, you know, that they're rarely likely to be helpful, yet we keep admitting people. So my experience was that, you know, it exacerbates the more troubling experiences that you're feeling. So my sensory system was even more on fire when I went in there. Everything was even less familiar. Everything was even less routine, less structured. And so I would quite predictably, and I hope your viewers would understand, quite understandably, have a meltdown, which would be met with restraint and restrictive practice
I
and
think,
lots of medication.
I think
So
like,
to cut a long story short, after routine restraints, multiple every day, routine seclusions, I was long-term segregated, so kept in a room with just a mattress on the floor for like days and days. I mean, some people are in those situations for decades, so I guess I'm lucky to have experienced it for a little over a week. But anyway, I escaped the country after 3.5 years. So I was sectioned for another year after the 3.5 years I'd already done. And as you know, enough's enough now. So I actually took a ferry to France and travelled to Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport, and then took a plane over to Africa. And I say Africa because I was in a number of different countries there. And there I rebuilt my life. But you know, if I hadn't had the capability and the you know, I don't want to say courage, because I didn't feel particularly courageous at the time, but to do that, I think that I would be another statistic, Max, and we know that at the moment average length of stay is 5 to 6 years. So goodness knows where it would have been. And just one more thing, I'm not an isolated case. There's more than 2,000 autistic people in this situation right now, and there's more than 100 autistic people that are in long-term segregation, so we're in a room with a mattress with no people around them. It's just really is a human rights violation.
Absolutely. I really can't even comprehend why it is part of the Mental Health Act still. That it just confuses me. Really does. And I think it still shows that, again, it's a major element of where we're behind. I mean, every time I've gone up to the Houses of Parliament, it always feels like they sort of see things through tinted glasses. They don't really see the full picture. It's just, it confuses me.
I mean, there's some people doing some great work. I mean, I think, people like Baroness Hollins, but she has lived experience. Her son is autistic and has a learning disability, and I think unless you kind of understand what it's like on the ground, it's really difficult to empathize. But I mean, I guess just on the Mental Health Act, I campaigned with the National Autistic Society to have the change, and I'm glad that I did that. And I think that change should happen. Definitely it should happen. But I think that we do need to be worried, because at the moment, there isn't adequate community provision, and there's the government aren't planning on investing. So where do people that have, supposedly lower support needs, like me, like you, I guess, what happens, if we have a crisis? And my worry is that we'll be entering the criminal justice system, or they'll be making up another psychiatric diagnosis to admit us to hospital, because they can't admit only for autism. So I think definitely, as you say, the change is right. Why is it there? But at the same time, we really desperately need, well, guess what you were saying at the start, acceptance, awareness, acceptance, but also we need some money. We need some money in the community, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's always a combination of things, isn't it? People either don't know enough about it, or when they do know enough about it, they ain't got the money to put anything in place. It's always a catch-22. They're always playing catch up all the time, and it really, I just don't think being sectioned is the right thing for an autistic person.
No, and hospital's not the right place. So, for me, people sometimes ask me, Max, what would have been helpful? And I think it's, a team of people to come into my house, not to live, but, an OT to give me a hand, a speech and language therapist to give me a hand, a psychologist and a counsellor, to help me with my very autistic bereavement reaction. That would have been helpful for a start. And, if that wasn't sufficient, then some sort of single occupancy crisis housing, so a space that's safe, and maybe my family could stay or at least visit. I could see my daughter, but instead we've got these sensory charged warehouses. Really, I don't even think they're fit for non-autistic people, to be quite honest. They're just not. They're just so antiquated. They're not care. They don't care. It's not a caring place. It's a containing place to keep people safe. There's very little in the way of actual care, and that isn't against hospital staff, because they're going to work to do a good job, and they do their best under very difficult circumstances. It's I guess it's just to say that, look, if we were going to design this from scratch, is this what anybody would design? And I think if those staff were honest, they'd say no.
I think it's a really important point, because I've always been asked the question, and I suppose I'll ask it to you as well. If someone is, it's always conflicting for me, because it's like, well, if an autistic person is in danger of for instance, taking their own life or anything else, it's like, well, should that person be sectioned? And my thought process has always been like, well, if they're in trouble of taking their own life, I don't want them sectioned, because I don't think that's the best place for them either. At the same time, I don't want them taking their own life or doing something they regret. And I think it comes back to probably what you said about having somewhere that isn't there, and improving it, or improving the current structure. For you, what's the first thing you would what's the first thing you would do to improve that environment?
Well, I mean, I don't think we should necessarily have that environment. I mean, I don't know about you, Max, but when I was growing up, I felt very marginalized, very excluded, and even my daughter does now, even with the understanding that I have and the awareness that I have, and that, I've sort of communicated to her school, and those staff care, but still that is people's experience. And I think that when we put people into hospitals or institutions, it's kind of re-traumatizing, because you're experiencing once again that victimization, that marginalization, and you are, the weird one. And so, you're quite open to bullying and assault and sexual abuse, and all of those things happened to me. So I think it's if I was going to sort of change anything, I'd want to do it in a very, and I know it's a cliche, but a very trauma-informed way. So I think it's about creating a safe place for people when they're in crisis. But ideally, we don't want people going into crisis, do we? We want to be supporting people from the ages of 2, 3, 4 years old, when society's thinking, hang on a minute, there's something wrong with this child. And for that child not to grow up hearing there's something wrong with them, or they need more discipline, or they need a gluten-free diet, or they need, whatever it is that everybody's looking at them strangely for. And I think that if we support people, if we can create an environment, and it's very idealistic, where people are supported so that we don't have to intervene, then I think we'll be looking at a different future. But I think that that's a bit idealistic right now.
Yeah, but it's the way it needs to be. That's the most frustrating thing. Even though people would go, "Oh, it's very good saying that," but it's like, well, no, it's not very good saying that. It's happening. We need to fix it. Did you feel growing up as well that people underestimated what you could do, what you could achieve? Because if I might stand correct, but you did have a very successful swimming career.
Yeah, I'm really, really lucky, Max. I didn't experience that. I had no friends, and that is something I think that I underestimated how difficult that was. I was very, very isolated. But my so-called special interests, or I just like to say, what I was passionate about, was swimming, and so I just swam. And I ended up swimming for Great Britain, and representing our country for a number of years. And I'm academic. I can write very well. I've written a couple of books, which people can buy. And so no, I did get my praise and self-esteem elsewhere, but did I have any true connection with people? Anything meaningful? No, I didn't. And I think that's something that carries with me into adulthood. I'm scared of relationships. I'm scared of connecting deeply with people, because I'm always fearful, that I'm going to get hurt, or somebody's going to call me. I mean, people do. They call me weird, stuff like that. Which, that's how they experience me, and I guess that's what I'm talking about in terms of changing that narrative, so that kids don't go through that, and adults don't still have to suffer that, wherever that is. And I'm really lucky to work with a team of people who embrace diversity. I work at the Restraint Reduction Network, and every employer should be offering autistic people, or people that are diverse, or whatever it is, whatever their difference is, that kind of support, because it makes such a big difference, and it kind of creates well, you just feel accepted. I think, like you were saying, it is something that needs to happen. Just sometimes it just feels a bit far away, but I'm very lucky because I guess I grew up experiencing a level of success that not many people do, and that seemed to offset my other areas of where things were very difficult.
It's amazing, you know, it really is. I mean, as for you as well, compared to growing up being autistic and now being a parent of an autistic child, how does that sort of vary for you? You know,
It's
yeah,
difficult. Parenting's difficult, Max. You know, I think parenting is difficult. I mean, I've written a book called Autistic and Expecting, and in that it very much talks about the way that society looks on autistic people, and as an autistic parent, you get even more judgment. You know, you go on any parenting site and they're like, oh, so and so's told me how to do this, and that's conflicts with this. You know, parents are always judged, but as an autistic parent, my goodness, you know, you've got another layer of complexity there, and another layer again of marginalization, of victimization. You know, going to parenting groups, or going to toddler groups, or going to soft play as an autistic parent. You know, these are sensory charged environments, aren't they? And going into school as an autistic parent, saying, I think we need to do this for my autistic child. You know, and you know, being how are you received? Of course, it's very different to if you were neurotypical, I think. But I think at the same time, if you are an autistic parent, or you're an autistic person thinking of having a child and expanding your family, you know, you're not going to get any better connection, I don't think, or any better understanding for your child. And I guess anyone that's watching this as well, like, I've had a number of autistic people say, but so we can have children. Well, yes, you can definitely. You know, autistic people can and do have children. We do reproduce. So don't be afraid of it. You know, don't be afraid of it. It's one of the most rewarding things. And as I say, that deep empathy and love that you have and develop and continue to develop as your kids develop, you know, it's like nothing else.
yeah, I think you're spot on. You know, it's funny. I actually interviewed my mum for this series, which is it's very awkward because it's like me asking my mum, you know, questions about how she brought me up, and I'm like, I'm not interrogating mum. I just want to sort of get what it was like from her point of view, and it was very much parents judging her, kids not wanting to invite me round because their parents are like, oh no, don't invite him round because, you know, he's the weird one. So yeah, and it is. I think it's heartbreaking for a parent because you almost want to, you know, you especially being autistic. You know, my mum's not autistic, but I think for yourself, you've gone through it, and then you have to see your child necessarily go through it, and it's just like, my God, you know, why is this still happening? I suppose for the people out there as well, if you could describe autism for the viewers out there, how would you describe it?
I would just simply describe it as just a difference, you know, which, because the world is as it is, you know, requires varying levels of support to survive what we've constructed, you know, what humans have constructed. I mean, definitely there are. I mean, goodness, I swam for my country, so definitely, you know, that kind of intense focus that autistic people have. Can make you successful, and I know some people refer to it as a superpower. I mean, I don't see it as a superpower, but I do as well, having been in units. I've seen how difficult it can be for some autistic people who are thoroughly engrossed in a topic, to be supported to live a life that they want, and that isn't the person's fault necessarily, you know, or at all. It's not the person's fault at all, you know. It's that I think we're still in a place where we don't understand how to support difference, And I think that really of any disability, but I think especially for autism, and especially if you are deemed to have lower support needs, I think those are the key points. It can be very disabling, it can be very enabling, but really it's all to do with how we look and support difference.
I completely agree. Really do. It's just. I think I went up to Parliament one year and they said the awareness is really high at the moment, but the understanding is still not quite where we want it to be. And I feel that's always the block, that we need to get sort of past, is because there's so many people that go, oh, I know about autism. It's, like Rain Man, for instance. And, they think they know everything about it just because off the basis of one film. But I suppose my next question would be for you as well on the educational side, because a few years ago in 2016, I want to say, might be wrong, I'd done a campaign with the National Autistic Society called Too Much Information. And it was about a man called Stephen going to job interview after job interview after job interview and getting basically declined. And through every interview, the months went up. So it went from 3 months to 6 months to 9 months and so on. The campaign, we found out through doing a survey, was the government didn't take account of numbers at the time for the amount of autistic people in work. And the survey showed that it was about 16% of autistic people in full-time work. We got the government to agree to take a note of those numbers. And what came out of the ONS last year, I believe, is there's actually only 21 to 22% of autistic people in any kind of work. So we were looking at 16% of people in full-time work, and actually and other figures around there saying part-time and everything else. And then this statistic came out last year actually saying there's only 21 to 22% of autistic people in any kind of work. What do you think the government need to do to improve that statistic, and also employers? Because there's probably a lot of employers out there that don't understand it enough.
I think there's two things, Max. I mean, I think the first thing is we need to make sure that autistic people are supported in school as children, because I think that what we learn in school is that we're weird, lazy, silly, can't achieve, can't work as a team. This is what we learn in school, and we underachieve because we're in classes of 30 to 34, sometimes more children. We can't access the education, to get the grades that we could likely get if we were supported. I also think that the exams discriminate against autistic children, especially English, like the emphasis on poetry and literature, with all of those metaphors and nuances in text and all of that. So I think we underachieve there. And so I think that pigeonholes us and teaches us a number of things about ourselves, not least that we're just not good enough. We're just not like everybody else. So that when we go into the workplace, we've underachieved and we're carrying all of that baggage. And we know we're going to get rejected, right? We know we're going to get rejected before we even apply for the job. And even if we get the job, we're going to be rejected in the sense that nobody's going to account for our sensory needs. Nobody's going to account for our executive dysfunction. Nobody's this, all of this stuff. So I think it's really hard. So I think the first thing we need to do is start with schools. And in terms of employers, I don't have any easy answers for that. I mean, I think the government, I think they need to create some positive discrimination laws, so that you have to employ. But then again, are we just putting autistic people in situations they can't manage to fulfill some sort of arbitrary target when we actually don't really? I think we need to, the bottom line is we don't care about certain members of our population like we do others, because they don't contribute in the same way that other people do. And I think when we start to accept that, that's part of the acceptance. And people might think, oh, I don't agree with that, listening to this. But, what are we doing individually as individual people? What are we doing to support our autistic communities or our other disabilities? Because I know that I don't do anything to support the blind community do you know what I mean? I'll open a door for somebody, but other than that, I guess it's because my interest is so focused on autism that I really, really push hard. But as a society, we need to take responsibility for everybody in our society. And I think it needs to be individual.
Absolutely, and that's it's really interesting you say that about the what are we doing for other communities, because what I think I really like, even I could be doing more. I think we're all guilty of not doing enough for other people. But a few years ago, I sort of asked myself that question as well. And what I made sure was I'd do a charity event every year for a different charity. Just a small thing like that, I think can really help. But I can openly say I think the only charity I've done twice is the National Autistic Society, because, as you say, it's something that you're passionate about, and you resonate with it. You really connect with it, and you want to make a difference. And I think you're right. Everything has its own cause. Anything that you look at, which what I would just like to see more people get involved with this or with that. Even if it wasn't autism, if it was for the blind deaf community, or if it was for the people that have gone through an event in their life that means that they now have to be in a wheelchair, or anything like that. I think if everyone done one thing, it would be a lot better.
Yeah, it's a culture change. And I actually think that if the government just insisted on its laws and its policies and its guidance actually happening in practice,
yeah,
our lives would be so much better for all communities, for everybody. But everything is such a struggle and a fight. I did some forums a few weeks back about what good looks like as part of this building the right support thing, and people just said that good doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist for the autistic community at the moment. And I think that's quite shocking, actually. And they just said that one lady said that if it doesn't feel like a fight, then she's like wondering and worried what's going on, because her whole life for her and her child has just been an absolute fight to get what she's legally entitled to. So I think part of it's a culture change, and part of it is if the government just did and invested in what they've committed to, things would look very different.
Yeah, absolutely. I really resonate with that. Like, if it's a fight, is that like, it's almost like I'm quite a warrior. So it's like, if I'm not worried about something, well, let's be honest, there's never a case where I'm not worried about something. There's always something. Because if there isn't something, then something's wrong, right? So I am a consistent warrior in that aspect. But I think, as you say, it all falls back to what we're conditioned with as when we're young. If we don't get it right from the ground, that level, everything has a knock-on effect. Everything is behind, and you're just constantly let down across the way, to the point where if you've got teachers saying to you, okay, I don't care if you're autistic, or, that's no excuse. And then you go into work and they sort of go, well, yeah, why can't you work in that office? Or why don't you want to work with this person? Or why don't you want to do this? Why don't you want to do that? And you don't want to say because you're autistic, and you think you've got that embedded in your mind, or they're just going to say it's an excuse. And as well, you as an individual feel, I suppose, you just keep it to yourself. You keep it bottled up because you just don't want people to think these things. And I think that's where masking comes into it, because a lot of people just mask and hide it. And then, they don't get the help that they need either. I mean, how did you find growing up and masking? Because, I know it can be I mean, I know some people are really good at it, and then some people, just aren't. So how did you find sort of masking and that growing up?
Yeah, it's a good question, Max. I mean, I don't think I know really who I am. I mask so much all the time, in different settings, that it's really difficult to strip all of that back. Because we're all conditioned, aren't we, to behave, the way that society expects, and when you can't conform to that, even though you're trying, so hard, it's exhausting. And I think that's why our rates of anxiety and depression and suicide are so high, not because we've got inherently faulty brains, but because we're struggling, and we're not supported to be ourselves. We don't feel safe in our own skin, and that's reinforced consistently wherever we go, whether it be school, the supermarket, the street, wherever we go. That's consistently reinforced, and that was something that was really profound, when I landed in Africa after I had escaped, not having to wear that so fully. It was quite freeing.
Yeah, and it was exactly what you needed as well, which you wouldn't have got at that mental facility, mental health facility. You just wouldn't have got that. And I think it's key exploring different avenues to make sure someone is supported, and we don't just. I think what too many people do is they go by the rule book and they just go, oh no, that rules for them, that rules for everyone. And it's very rich because a lot of the time we're told in our life when nothing's black and white. But when it comes to laws or things that should happen to us, it's very black and white. It's like, well, sorry, but we can't do that for you because we'd have to do that for everyone else. And it's a very black and white approach. And then we're expected as we grow up to sort of have this grey area and go, well, the world's not black and white. But throughout our lives, it's been very black and white by the things that have been imposed on us and enforced on us, which I always find interesting because it's just like, so like, hang on, what? It makes no sense. I suppose the last, or the two last questions I had for you as well was, do you think government are doing enough, and do you think government are doing too many things that are wrong in terms of cutting people's personal independent payment, all this budget cutting? I can understand because of well, I can't really understand because it's been going on for ages. I would like to say it's down to COVID and Brexit, but it's not. It's been happening for ages, to the point where even I was turned down at one point for personal independent payment because I was well dressed and well nourished, and that was the actual reason. And I suppose the last question after that would be, what have you got coming up? What things would you just like to say? Like your books. Just tell us a bit more about that as well.
Well, I guess on the first question, I mean, I'm a bit of a socialist, so I think that we need to invest in things and invest in people, for people to do well, and to flourish and reach their potential. And then on the second thing, I've published two books. One's called Unbroken, which is a sort of I guess a memoir of what happened to me in mental health hospitals, and then what happened when I escaped. And my second book is called Autistic and Expecting, and that is about autistic experiences of thinking of having a family, conceiving, and then what it's like to have a family. It's very practical, and it's also really good. It's got a like a maternity passport, so it can help people with their sensory and communications differences, in to access the support that they need. And I work at the Restraint Reduction Net-work, and we're constantly trying to think of ways to reduce reliance on unnecessary restrictive practices. So we're thinking a lot about support rather than interventions, and we work closely with CQC, NHSC, the government, to try and make sure that that people are supported in the ways that are most comfortable to them. So yeah, that's where I am right now, and what I'm up to. And you can find me on Twitter as well. I'm sure Max will put a link for you.
I know I said last question, but I promise you the last question now. I obviously went to a school where restraining was very much a thing. I think now they have to call it positively handle, which is this forever language thing. But what really scared me, I mean, thankfully, touch wood, I say touch wood, I can't see myself getting restrained, but hey, you never say never. Luckily, I was never restrained, but I saw a lot of people that was, just because these people were not only autistic, but they came from very traumatic events that happened in their life. And I do a lot of speeches with John Reed, who was a deputy head at that school, and I think we both agreed, coming out, because we're coming out of that school because we're both in touch now, is that we didn't like the fact that people were restrained. We just didn't like it. And what was very daunting for me as a kid was I heard a story from one of the teachers at the school where he was explaining that they had to be very well trained to do the restraints, because there had been a child at another school that had been restrained and he sadly died because he couldn't breathe. So just imagine, for instance, myself in that situation. I got teachers saying to me, we're trained to do restraints, but there's a kid at another school that died for a restraint. So even through that, it was like, my God, it made me not want to get restrained. Not that I would ever be aggressive in any way anyway. And I can actually say for this,
I think we're all aggressive though, Max. I think if you were put in a psychiatric hospital and locked in a room and given loads of drugs, and I think anyone can be aggressive, anybody. What we're talking about here is needs not being met. And for those autistic children, their needs probably weren't being met and supported, which is why they were saying, hey, I don't like this, and acting in a way which other people found to be challenging and aggressive. So again, I think it comes back to supporting people. But look, restraint's dangerous. Any restraint is dangerous, whether it be coercion, psychological restraint, environmental restraint, chemical restraint, physical restraint. It's all dangerous. We shouldn't be doing it. There needs to be other ways to support people, so that we don't have a situation where we have to put hands on because somebody's life is in danger or threatened, or the person is a threat to another. So, if anybody's interested in this, please join the Restraint Reduction Network. It is free. Membership is free. You just need to make a pledge to say what you do. And I mean, you do a lot, Max, to reduce reliance on restrictive practices through raising awareness. So please do join us, because I think the more people that we can get sort of talking the same language, the more impact we can have on changing culture.
You've got a member. There you go. I've signed up just like that. No, I completely agree, because it's one of the things that really scared me. As a child, seeing that was never nice. Was never nice, and it wasn't nice for the people doing it. I can categorically say no one ever walked away and thought, "Oh yeah, that was good."
It's dangerous for everybody. It's traumatic for staff and the person that it's happening to.
Absolutely. All I can say is, Alexis, is obviously thank you so much for coming on and giving up your time to come on and talk to me today. And yeah, just thank you ever so much.
Oh, thanks, Max. It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you.